It's time for bookkeeping, beer, and BS. Let's talk about the fixed cost stuff. So on the admin side, I see people get really sideways as they scale, and it tends to be not early on. Like when somebody's just starting out, they have like no admin expense. It's super skinny. As they hit 500,000, a million, a couple million, that's when admin starts to get out of control because you have so many people working on so many different things, and it's just hard to make sure that they're adding enough revenue to pay for themselves. Hence, the metrics that we talked about in some way to like make it a fun scoreboard for them. The fixed overhead investments are another place that I see people go sideways, probably even sooner. And it tends to be when they're like renting their first location, or they get a bunch of software because they're trying to get rid of paper, which I totally get, but it's not increasing their productivity or increasing their revenue. It tends to be now, like one of the things I repeatedly say to our clients is, be careful with those infrastructure investments because your clients don't give a shit. They won't pay you anymore because you have a big fancy shop. You'll get some employee engagement value out of it. That's important, but it takes a long time for that to pay off. And so generally my advice is like, hey, work from your house until your spouse is about to kick you out. Like push that line as long as you can. Your spouse will be happy to get that $3,000 a month rather than not get that $3,000 a month. Just always remind them of that's what that's worth. It's about $3,000 a month that is still in your bank account and not in somebody else's bank account. And the minute you rent that location, your revenue doesn't go up one bit, but you're out $36,000 a year. And if I'm making a $36,000 investment, that needs to bring me just like high level $150,000 of revenue to pay for itself. That $36,000 of rent is going to have a really hard time of making me $150,000 of revenue to like cover itself through my business model. So it takes a long time for that shit to pay for itself. But I see guys that are like, I'm going to go get the biggest facility because I need all this space, or I need to have this stuff, or I need to have a place for my employees. I totally get that. I think there's like a time for it. It just seems like it happens a little too soon a lot of times. And then you don't have any money left to spend on recruiting to go get the employees to fill up that space.
Exactly. And it's breaking down those fixed costs of before you're making those decisions, adding them all up together. And then, what is my current client load? I like to look at it that way. Before you're going to make that decision about that office or lease or anything, and then everything new that's going to come with it. I think a lot of people don't analyze that. Like when you're having a home office or you're doing something shared, it's not just the lease, it's your new, internet, utilities, taxes, everything that's coming with the lease.
There's a lot.
Drive time, all the things. But dividing that out of how you're going to pay for that. Like I love to think of overhead costs you can't pass them on to the clients, right? But what's the per client cost?
Mm-hmm.
What's the per job cost? And then how many new do I need to get? How much do I need to grow? How many new clients? How much new revenue to break that down into that it's a profitable cost, that it makes sense.
Yeah, I like looking at it by client. I think that's a cool little metric. I usually look at it in terms of like percent of revenue, how much of your revenue is going towards that fixed stuff. And if you're high, I'm cheap, so I don't like to spend more than like 5 or 6% on it. If it's higher than that, then I'm looking at like, what can I cut? Which it's really hard to cut those expenses, especially like you start getting dependent on a software. You might we use Trainual for all of our training. It's a great software, but it's a few $100 a month. And it was like, at one point it was like, oh, we could be on the $129 a month version. We don't need to be on the $370 a month version. We can cut that, right? There's some softwares you can maybe cut that are recurring expenses, but it's like, you're not going to not pay your internet bill. Once you have a rent agreement, you're pretty much locked in there. Like, yeah, you can turn the heat down to 60 in the winter and the AC at 80 in the summer to save a few bucks, but like that's gonna erode your employee morale more than if they had to come to your house for a job. So there's like big time trade-offs in there. It's hard to cut those expenses. So I do like to look back a little bit. I look backwards, say, is there like stuff we're paying for that we can get rid of that's not adding value? Some of those fixed things are really hard to get rid of. But to the flip side of it, I think where you were going with it, Angela, is I can also look at it proactively and say, okay, I've got this infrastructure, and we have this in our Minneapolis window cleaning and pressure washing business right now, where it's like, man, we're a little high on infrastructure. We're doing a little over $1 million. We really need to be at 1.4 or 1.5 with our current infrastructure. That's the infrastructure we've invested in. Now, like, we need this investment to pay off. We've built it. Now we got to grow into it. But if you overextend yourself too much, again, that's like money going out the door that you can't just be like, hey, Mrs. Jones, we're going to have to charge you more for this job. We know we're not adding any more value to you, but it's like when your employee comes to you and is like, hey, I need a raise because I just bought a new car. And you're like, sounds like you shouldn't have bought a new car, right? Like, you should have bought a car you could afford. Well, you should have rented a facility you could afford. It's kind of the same logic, right? You wouldn't give somebody a raise because they just bought a new car. Well, Mrs. Jones isn't going to pay you more because you just rented a bigger facility. That's just going to take that $36,000 a year out of your pocket that you now don't have to go grow your business with. You don't have it to spend on recruiting. You don't have it to spend on marketing. You don't have it to go hire Angela and go get a virtual assistant to answer the phone to help you actually grow the business. So I think there's a good time and place for those investments, but generally wait as long as you can. That's what I'm saying.
The other thing, like, I'm not the accountant. I love your percentages because those don't motivate me. I mean, that you should look at them, but I'm like, 5%, that doesn't motivate me. When we talked before, when I was on late night, I talked about my dance studio and the overhead of that and helping other dance studio owners with. So this is the other way I like to look about it. These are the overhead costs, right? I had a dance studio. I had the lease. I had this building. Now, how can I pack as many kids in there as possible?
Yeah. How do we maximize this?
Per hour, and helping other people do that. Like, I have this building. How can you make the most, stretch those fixed costs as much as you can? Mm-hmm. And I think those things are a little bit more motivating to, like, when you're working with business owners that don't want to think about the percentage. It's like, okay, these are your expenses no matter what. And they're not going to go up when you go out and get 50 more clients.